He was the one who always smiled the brightest, not because life was kind to him, but because he had mastered the art of hiding storms. Behind silence, every time he laughed a little louder than usual, it was only to drown out the noise inside his chest, a noise that kept getting louder day after day, but nobody heard it because nobody cared to listen. He was always there, for everyone, picking up calls at midnight, showing up when no one else was staying behind after the world moved on. But when he started falling, there was no one to catch him. No one even noticed he was slipping. Truth is, he was screaming inside, screaming for someone to ask how he was doing without expecting him to be okay, screaming for someone to stay without needing a reason, screaming for someone to say they saw his pain even when he hid it so well. But the world only pays attention to noise, and he was too soft, too loyal, too silent for too long. His voice wasn't loud enough to disturb their comfort, so they ignored him until he stopped speaking altogether. He gave everything without asking for anything in return, not because he didn't want to be loved, but because he believed that true love doesn't keep score. But the problem is, when you give without limits to people who only take, eventually you become empty. And that's exactly what happened to him. He became an empty shell, carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations, while no one even saw the burden crushing him. He was tired, not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the kind that came from feeling invisible in rooms where he had once been the loudest light. He never asked for much, just loyalty, honesty, a little effort. Someone to say, "I'm here," when he was quiet, someone to notice the shift in his eyes when the storm inside became too much to handle. But instead, they told him to man up, to stop being dramatic, to get over it. They called his silence moodiness, his distance arrogance, and his strength a threat. They mocked what they couldn't understand and dismissed what they never took time to see. So he stopped explaining, stopped justifying, stopped hoping someone would get it. And that's when they noticed. That's when the room felt colder, because his warmth wasn't there. That's when they reached out, and he didn't answer, not out of revenge, but because he was finally protecting what little pieces of him were left. They noticed the silence, because it became louder than his presence ever was. And by the time they realized what they had lost, he had already started finding himself in places where he didn't need to be understood, just to be respected. He was done being the second choice, done being someone people only turned to when they had no one else, done carrying conversations alone, done fixing what he didn't break. He was done bleeding for people who wouldn't even bandage him back. He realized that sometimes silence is the only language pain speaks, and sometimes not answering is the most honest answer you can give to people who never listened in the first place. His silence wasn't weakness, it was wisdom, the kind that comes from being broken too many times and learning that not everyone deserves a front row seat to your struggle. It was strength, the kind that grows in the shadows when you build yourself from ruins. Alone, it was peace, not the absence of pain, but the presence of clarity. He finally knew who he was without them, and that realization changed everything. They came back. Of course, they always do once they feel the absence of the one who gave them everything without asking. But by then, it was too late, because he had outgrown the version of him that needed their love to feel worthy. He no longer needed closure. He no longer needed apologies. He no longer needed anyone to complete him. He had become whole in the silence, and that kind of healing is sacred. He learned that not every goodbye has to be said out loud. Sometimes it's in the way you stop chasing, the way you stop explaining, the way you stop showing up when no one shows up for you. He learned that it's okay to walk away from people you love if they are the reason you keep breaking. he learned that being alone in peace is better than being surrounded in pain. And most of all, he learned that silence is not empty. It's full of answers. The world will always notice when you go quiet because they were never paying attention to your presence. They only notice your absence because it creates a void they can't fill. He was never truly seen when he was loud, only when he vanished. And that says everything about the way this world loves the ones who are always there until they're not. Now he walks differently, not because he's bitter, but because he's better. His eyes don't search for validation. His hands don't reach for temporary love. His heart doesn't beg to be understood. He's become the kind of man who doesn't need to speak to be heard, who doesn't need to prove to be valued, who doesn't need to stay to feel loyal. He understands now that the loudest strength often moves in silence, and the deepest healing happens in the absence of noise. He's not cold, he's careful. Not distant, he's protective. He's not heartless, he's just tired of giving his soul to people who only came for comfort, not commitment. And if that makes him hard to reach, so be it, because the man who once screamed for love now sits quietly with peace, and that's the most dangerous version of him there has ever been, not because he'll hurt anyone, but because no one can hurt him anymore. They called it pride when he didn't answer back, but it was restraint. They called it ego when he walked away, but it was self-respect. They said he changed, but the truth is, he just remembered who he was before the world convinced him. He had to earn his place in other people's lives, and now that he's found himself again, there's no turning back. Because when a man learns to live without the love he used to beg for, he becomes unstoppable, not because he's healed completely, but because he's no longer waiting to be saved by anyone else. And that's where the real power begins. Not in revenge, not in bitterness, but in the quiet rise that no one sees coming. He's the man who once screamed inside while smiling on the outside. And now he's the man who speaks only when it matters, who listens more than he talks, and who walks away, not because he doesn't care, but because he finally cares enough about himself. And if they ever wonder why he disappeared, they should know it wasn't sudden. It was the result of 1,000 silent cries, 1,000 overlooked moments, 1,000 times he chose them, and they chose someone else. It was never one thing, it was everything, and once he stopped explaining, it all finally made sense.